Hello everyone, I'm Westropp-Evans and today is February 5th, 2025. It's now 488 days that Hamas are holding hostages in captivity inside Gaza. 79 remain in the terror dungeons, some alive, others not. This is the live daily briefing of the Israeli Citizen Spokesperson's Office. US President Donald Trump has suggested relocating people in Gaza to go, as he says, to somewhere better. Now, many are claiming that they speak for Gazans objected to these remarks. The Palestinian UN representative responded, "Our country and our home is the Gaza Strip." But let's be clear about something. Gazans want to relocate to Israel. The Palestinian representative added, "Let them go back to their original homes inside Israel." Did you catch that? Many don't actually object to relocating Gazans as long as they relocate to Israel. That's UNRWA's position. UNRWA registered 1.6 million Gazans as refugees, not as a result of the current conflict, but way back in 1949, right after the establishment of Israel. Now, 1.6 million Gazans believe their true home is Israel, not Gaza. So let's be clear. The war was never about the Gaza Strip. Gaza is a temporary home until Gazans can free Palestine and destroy Israel. That's why the October 7 massacre was so widely celebrated by Gazans. Invading Israel and massacring its people is the first step to free Palestine. So whatever happens with the US plans, one thing is clear. Gazans will continue to make war as long as they believe that Israel, and not Gaza, is their home. Now, US President Trump said something else interesting that I think many people missed. President Trump said Qatar is trying to help. Now, President Trump's envoy for the hostage release had said Qatar was doing God's work. And it's a bit worrying that Qatar manages to remain in President Trump's good graces. On October 7th, while innocents were still being massacred, Qatar condemned Israel. On October 7th, Hamas leadership celebrated the massacre in their Qatar headquarters. The US shouldn't be asking Qatar to please help as if they might convince Hamas of something. Qatar funds Hamas to the tune of nearly $2 billion. And Qatar has been telling Hamas to keep the hostages. The US has leverage over Qatar. The US grants Qatar major non-NATO ally status. And the US chooses to keep the massive Al Udeid base in Qatar. The US should demand that Qatar force their Hamas allies to release all hostages, and the US should tell Qatar to stop support for terror and bloodshed, or else they will turn their carrots into sticks. All right, let's take some questions from our audience watching live on social media.
Thank you, Asher. Our first question comes from Instagram. Do we know how many more of the hostages are alive? And what will happen when Hamas starts sending home bodies instead of living hostages?
This is an incredibly important question, and the fact of the matter is we don't for sure know which hostages are still alive and dead. There is a lot of narratives and counter-narratives that play out. You know, even something as seemingly straightforward as the Bibas family, which Israel has been calling for so long to find out the status of Kfir Ariel and Shiri Bibas after the release of their father and husband Yarden, but still it is unknown for sure the status of who is alive and who is dead. As for what would happen once live hostages finish being returned and dead bodies start coming back, well, I can tell you what will happen here in Israel is pain. Significant pain, horror, upset, a whole myriad of emotions for the poor families that are having to deal with these returns. This is a truly horrific situation, and I think we've referred to it fairly aptly in the past as the sickest form of game show you could possibly imagine, with people waiting week in and week out to find out if their loved ones will be released and trying to find out what status they'll be released in, alive, dead, wounded, healthy. At the moment, it is so many unknowns. So many unknowables for the time being, but all we can do is pray that all hostages are returned in whatever state they may be in at this time and as soon as humanly possible.
Thank you. Our next question comes from YouTube. Can you say anything about the murderers who are being released? What do Israelis think about this?
Israelis are unfortunately all too aware of the sort of situations that occur when murderers, Palestinian murderers, are released en masse, as has happened in the past, such as with the exchange of over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners for Gilad Shalit, and in previous times throughout Israel's history when these sort of mass exchanges have occurred. We're exchanging hostages, children, those who are being kidnapped, civilians, for murderers, criminals that are being held in the Israeli penal system. And this exchange leaves Israelis very nervous, understandably so, afraid for the future and what it might hold, and all too aware of the fact that we may be releasing the next generation of those that would come out and perform the next October 7 massacre, or even worse, if they had the power to do so. Israel is aware that this means that the ongoing need for tight security to manage the sort of situations that could occur in the future is critical. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem like this would help to further the process of peace and security for this region, these communities, and frankly, the entire world.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Aviva on YouTube. Are there any thoughts on what Trump is actually hoping to accomplish in Gaza as a sort of compromise from potentially something that he proposed and something that the other side is willing to agree to?
Aviva, an important question, but frankly, one that is far too early to say. At this stage, we heard the remarks from Trump overnight, Israel time, there yesterday in the US. At the moment, what we do know is that Trump has spoken about some sort of relocation plan, but more to the point, what we understand here and what has not changed for us here, no matter what the latest remarks are from US President Donald Trump, is that we need to see a return of the hostages. We need to see a return of a removal from the sort of status quo that we've seen where Hamas remains in power in the Gaza Strip, hanging this sword of Damocles dangling over the head of all Israelis, threatening to, instead of invest in the rebuilding of the Gaza Strip to better help their civilian population, but rather to rebuild their own military power in their own interests. We need to see Hamas removed from power, disarmed. We need to see the de-radicalization of Gazan people and people all throughout this region. And frankly, what we really need to see is to have a sense of security and safety that mean that the threats of an October 7 massacre, not once, not twice, but thousands of times, as has been directly threatened by Hamas leaders and officials, that is not able to happen again anytime in the future.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Instagram. Is it true that Egypt is keeping the prisoners in a hotel? Do we know exactly what's going on with them once they've been deported to other countries?
No, if we're talking about the prisoners that Israel is releasing back into the community, well, that's for other countries, frankly, to deal with. Israel has agreed to terms with Hamas for the time being, in which Hamas is required to exchange the remaining hostages that they have held onto for now, getting very close to 500 days for these prisoners that Israel is agreeing to release at a totally skewed ratio. And again, as I say, we are exchanging hostages, frankly, for murderers and lifetime criminals. It is not a fair and equitable situation at any level, regardless of what happens to them after the fact. But more to the point, Israel's primary concern is, number one, getting the hostages back, and number two, ensuring that there can be a sense of security and stability into the longer term. That is the primary focus, that Israel can ensure that its own sovereign borders, its own security, and its own people are protected. Frankly, it would be a good thing for the world and for the region if the people and civilians of Gaza could be protected from their own criminal leaders, these militant terrorist leaders who had come out and used them simply as pawns in their own game. But at the end of the day, the key goal here is to get the hostages back, and that is Israel's primary focus for the time being.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Denise on Instagram. Is there any concern that Trump's statement could potentially harm the hostage deal?
Denise, this is also a difficult question, as it stands right now. As it seems, Hamas would use any excuse possible to harm the hostage deal if they felt that it would benefit them. That's what it comes down to, basic power dynamics. If Hamas feels they can get away with it, they will. They are not good faith actors. They are not to be trusted in this situation. Hamas will take any advantage, will use any leverage, will step over any line that they can in order to serve their own interests, to remain in power, to stay in control, and to harm any that they would believe stands against them, whether that be Israeli military, civilians, or frankly, even Gazan civilians. This is the situation that we find ourselves in, and whether one remark or other can be attributed to what may or may not happen in the future. I mean, frankly, if you are dealing with such bad faith actors, you cannot attribute to any particular remark or statement and need to be aware of the entire situation you're dealing with. We are making deals with the devil here, and the devil certainly does not follow the rules.
Thank you. Our next question is from X. If the Gazans do leave, would they want to go to Egypt or would they want to go to a different country?
I mean, this is a critical question as well, but frankly, if we're going to be honest with this, where the Gazans want to go, well, according to according to UNRWA and their 1.6 million Gazans that are living inside the Strip that claim refugee status, primarily they would love to go to what they would consider a free Palestine, which would mean the destruction of Israel in its entirety and a return to a land that has not existed arguably ever, but frankly, certainly not since Israel was founded back in 1948. They want to return to a fantasy that doesn't exist, and they are continuously living, perpetuated by the UN through UNRWA, in a reality that doesn't actually coincide with what is really going on around them. Now, whether they want to go to any particular country or another in this current status quo, who's to say? But as I keep saying, more importantly, time and again, the critical factor here is not to hypothesize about future policies that have yet to be determined, about future arrangements that have yet to be engaged with, but rather to focus on the reality that exists now. Because we are all living this now. Here in the Middle East, here from Tel Aviv, where I'm speaking to you from, we are having to deal with this reality now. The reality is that 79 hostages still remain in captivity, getting close to 500 days now. That we are in a ceasefire, but we do not have a peace agreement by any means, and we're frankly not even close. That phase 2 of the hostage deal, in order to release our young men, has not been agreed to, and as frankly needs to be the primary focus right now in order to try and get some sort of resolution to this unbearable status quo. These are the things that we need to focus on right now, and we can speculate about the future at a time when we have a little bit more room to breathe. But this is not that time. All right, thank you. That is all we have time for. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow at 3 p.m. Israel time, 8 a.m. on the East Coast. I've been Westropp-Evans. Thanks so much for watching.